All right, here we go. Chapter 7, Launching the New Nation. Let's go through the notes here. Look at the years 1789 to 1800. Washington leads the new nation. Section 1. Very important that you know what the Electoral College is. In the very beginning, in early times in our history, there wasn't enough information out to decide for the common people to know all the information they need to elect the president. So they invented the system called the Electoral College, and that's a body of electors sent to represent the people's vote for president. Today, we still use that system. Each state has so many electors, and whoever wins the popular vote in each state gets all the electoral votes from that state. The first Electoral College chose George Washington to be president and John Adams to be vice president. It was pretty much a no-brainer. George Washington was the most widely respected leader at the time. John Adams was a well-respected leader from Boston as well. So George Washington, of course, is the first. And there's John Adams. He will be the first vice president and the second president. Organizing the government, the big challenge that Washington had was that no one had ever been president before. And, he knew his job as part of the executive branch was to enforce the laws and carry out the law. No one had set a precedent or an action before to show him how to do this. He decided to create departments or cabinets of like-minded, strong-thinking individuals to help him with this job. And his two key people were Alexander Hamilton, who was Secretary of the Treasury. He's in charge of the finances and the economy of the United States. He was from New York, and he was a person who came up under Washington during the Revolutionary War and who Washington had a lot of respect for. Very strong-willed, strong-minded, had a real vision for how he wanted the country to go. Thomas Jefferson, of course, was the well-respected leader from Virginia, writer of the Declaration of Independence, and he will be Secretary of State. His job will be, negotiating with other countries and, a real leadership position for our country. So those are the two main people in this first cabinet. These are the strongest minds and the strongest will of the cabinet. There's Alexander Hamilton right there. And there's Thomas Jefferson. The court system. The Constitution really only set up the Supreme Court as being part of the judicial branch. So we need to set up a system of federal district courts and courts of appeals. And the Judiciary Act of 1789 will set that up. So that kind of gets our formal court system going. American expectations are really high. People didn't come across the Atlantic Ocean and risk everything to live an average life. People didn't fight during the Revolutionary War to live an average life. So the pressure is on Washington and his cabinet and the first Congress to deliver the American dream to the people. They want trade, they want a strong economy, they want freedom, they want limited and fair taxes, a lot of things that they want. All right, Section 2. Let's talk about Alexander Hamilton and his plan for finance. We had a huge problem. The Revolutionary War left us in about $80 million of debt that we owed both our own people in terms of bonds, but also foreign countries, France and Spain and other places that lent us money so we could fight against the British. So a big problem that Hamilton and Washington are going to have to solve is how we're going to pay this money back. A bond is a certificate of debt. Basically, a bond works. You buy the certificate on a certain day. Say the certificate's worth $100. When the certificate is cashed back in 5-10 years later, it might be worth $150 or $200. So basically, it's a promise that the government will pay the people or the bank or whoever will pay the person who bought the bond back later at a higher price. People who bought bonds and take other types of financial risks looking to make money, buy things at a low price and hope to sell them at a higher price, are called speculators. Speculators, of course, involves risk because you could buy something at one price and it might lose value. Common ways that people speculate today is buying stocks and bonds and mutual funds, jewelry and things like that. Hamilton's plan is he wants to pay the foreign countries off first because he knows that we might need their help. He knows that they can lend us more, and then he'll pay people who bought bonds off second. So not very popular with people who bought bonds during the Revolutionary War, expecting to be paid back, but probably a good move for the country to keep France and Spain relatively happy with us. State debt's another huge problem. The individual states owed money. Remember, we don't have much of a government to start with in our country during the Revolutionary War, and so the states did most of the fighting and did a lot of the fighting, especially Massachusetts and New York. They spent a lot of money fighting the British on their own, and now they owe all this money to different people. And Hamilton's like, we need to take care of the states, so he's going to offer to pay $21.5 million of the $25 million in state debts back. This he thought would be good for the economy and also stabilize our country. Southern states who didn't spend hardly any money in the Revolutionary War and weren't in debt did not understand why they would have to raise taxes to pay off these debts that the northern states have incurred. And they're probably a little bit suspicious also because Hamilton was from the north. So right from the beginning, you can already start to see over many issues a divide between the northern and southern states. So that's something to keep an eye on. They have to make a deal. Hamilton, Washington, they make a deal. The southern states were very unhappy that the capital was located in New York. Think about how far that is by carriage ride from Georgia or South Carolina. They want the capital to be moved closer so they can get more information, they can have more access to the government. So what happens, they make a compromise, and the southern states agree to help pay off the northern states' debts if the capital is moved down to right between Virginia and Maryland, right about right here, which of course will become Washington, D.C., which is our capital today. So it was a good compromise. Jefferson and Hamilton don't agree on hardly anything. They're brilliant men. They're both brilliant, strong-willed men, but they think totally different about where the direction the country should go in. Jefferson wants a small, simple country with a small, simple government. He wants the states to have the power. He supported the Articles of Confederation. Hamilton, on the other hand, wants a strong national government. He wants a powerful government and a powerful industrial country. And he thinks that strong government will ultimately lead to more success for the people. Jefferson says industry is not good. We should live simple farming life, be free on your own land, live peacefully. Hamilton said no, we need to develop industry, build factories, and become a world superpower. So a huge difference there. Hamilton wanted high tariffs on other countries who are trying to sell us goods. Tariffs are taxes on imports and exports. He wants other countries to pay higher prices to sell things here, so we buy American things. Jefferson, because he's got a farming background, wants our tobacco and things not to face tariffs overseas, so he supports low taxes across the board, a small, cheap government, and he doesn't want tariffs at all. So that's a big difference. These differences really come out in the National Bank. Alexander Hamilton believes that we should create a national bank to stabilize the economy. He wants to create American coins, American dollars. He wants to store them in a safe place at a national bank, and he wants to lend them out at different interest rates to control the economy. He thinks it will regulate and stabilize the economy. Jefferson thinks that is a bad idea. He said it will give the government too much power, and the government is likely to abuse that power. He also said this is not in the Constitution. And if it's not in the Constitution, we can't do it. He said, there's no permission for a national bank to be in the Constitution. And Hamilton, again, would come back and counter-argue and say, well, there's nothing in the Constitution that says we can't have a national bank. So these two men really disagree on in the end, Hamilton gets his way, and we have a national bank. And there's the first national bank, and it was in New York. You can still see it today. It's not a bank anymore. It's just a historical site. So Hamilton National Bank. These two different viewpoints are called strict and loose construction about how the Constitution should be viewed. Strict construction, which is what Jefferson believed in, says basically if it's not in the Constitution, you can't do it. You have to have specific permission. The United States government must have specific permission from the Constitution to do anything. And if it doesn't, then the government's not supposed to do it. On the other hand, Hamilton believes in what's called loose construction. And loose construction basically says that the government can take reasonable actions that are for the good of the people, as long as the Constitution doesn't forbid it. So basically, the idea is as long as the Constitution doesn't tell the government they can't do something, they have permission to do it as long as it's reasonable and for the good of the people. Two totally different viewpoints of the Constitution, and that's an argument that we still have today. Do we want big government or small government? Do we want government to spend more and do more, or do we want government to give the people more freedom but do less? So that's an argument. In the end, like I said earlier, Washington and Congress agree with Hamilton. He wins out. The Bank of the United States is created in 1791. It has a 20-year charter, and then they'll reevaluate whether it's a good thing or not. And it does work. It stabilizes the economy. It gives us a safe place to store money. We start minting money and stop using British coins and stop bartering. We start using our own money. All these things are good. All right, Section 3, Challenges of French Revolution. A lot of the same ideals as the American Revolution, but it falls into great chaos. Mass executions, riots in the streets, all kinds of different people taking over, assassinations, torture, horrible things, all in the name of liberty and freedom. And then after several years of this type of chaos, the people are looking for a strong leader to step away from that, and that's where Napoleon steps in, and he will stabilize France and become the dictator of France. So he'll take all the freedom away, but at least it's more peaceful at least. How does that affect America? Well, as soon as Napoleon takes over, the thing about Napoleon is he doesn't just want to rule France. He wants to rule all of Europe and possibly as much of the world as he can get his hands on. And the number one thing he wants to do is conquer their arch enemy, Britain. There's nothing more that he wants to do than to sail across the English Channel and march into Britain and burn London to the ground and take it over. Britain knows that. They hate France. France hates them. And so they're going to start fighting. And the question is, whose side will the U.S. be on? Of course, the French expect us to be on their side because they helped us in the Revolutionary War. We decide to stay out of it. We issue what's called the Neutrality Proclamation. The Neutrality Proclamation says the U.S. will not take sides in European wars. We're going to stay out of European wars. They can fight each other all they want in Europe. We're not going to cross the ocean and get involved. That idea will kind of stick with us, or will stick with us, from that point in the 1790s all the way until World War I, where new technology really kind of forces us to get involved in European wars to kind of keep the peace and protect our own safety. So that's kind of a policy there. France and Britain, they fight, and a lot of people were saying, including Thomas Jefferson, that we better get involved and help the French because they helped us. And the French try to go around the Neutrality Proclamation by offering private American ships to help them attack the British. The French have the strongest ground army in the world, but the British have the strongest navy in the world. And the French need to cross the channel if they're going to get to England and actually attack. So they're trying to use American ships to do that for hire. Washington said that's a bad idea. Privateers are a bad idea because it's going to suck us in. Hamilton agrees with them. Hamilton and Washington said we need to stay out of this war, stay peaceful, and build our own country. Jefferson said we must help the French. They helped us. We need them as an ally. That's the final straw for Thomas Jefferson. He gets mad. He quits his spot as Secretary of State in 1793. And his anger, maybe rightfully so, as he kind of gets pushed out of all the major decisions, but he's going to kind of have the last laugh because he's going to be able to become president later and do some things that he wants done. Jay's Treaty. Good thing about the Neutrality Proclamation, it gives us a little bit of a peaceful footing to talk to the British and negotiate with them. We finally convinced them to abandon their forts in the frontier and to stop helping the Native Americans and giving them weapons. They also will pay for the damage to some of the boats that we've had overseas that they captured and stole and damaged. In return, we pay some debts left from colonial times. This was very unpopular with the common people. It was probably good for our country, at least in my opinion it is. It gets us moving forward with Britain, and it helps us on the frontier with them finally leaving their forts in Ohio and Michigan and going back to Canada. But the common person said, why are we making a deal with our enemy? We had so many people die there in the Revolutionary War. Why are we making a deal with the enemy? So Jay's Treaty was unpopular at the time, but I think it's true. Pinckney's Treaty solves all our problems with Spain. Remember, Spain was kind of bullying us around. They shut down the Mississippi River. Basically, we clarify where the borders are between us and Spain. And because of that, they decided to reopen the Mississippi River and let us use the port of New Orleans. And that's a good thing because all the trade in the interior part of the United States has to travel by river. There's no trucks, there's no trains. The mountains, the Appalachian Mountains, create a barrier to cross the east. So if you're in the interior beyond the Appalachian Mountains, you have to use the Ohio and Mississippi rivers to take your crops and things downstream to the port of New Orleans, where they get on caravels and sail, loaded up on sailboats, caravels, and when they sail to wherever. So here's the map of the U.S. at this time. You can see Spain has a lot of territory in the western part of the United States, but here's where the Pinckney Treaty clarifies that border, the Florida border. And of course the key here is they allow us now to have access to the Mississippi River and New Orleans, so we can get all the farm goods from this, from Kentucky, Indiana, Tennessee, Georgia, can all go down the Mississippi River and then load up on boats and go all over the world, or even back to the East Coast, because you can't cross the Appalachian Mountains in here. There's no way to cross those by waterways, too many waterfalls, and too hazardous for a big load. We get the British in Jay's Treaty to leave their forts up in Michigan and Ohio. They go back to Canada. The Native Americans will no longer receive help from them, and that's really going to hurt the Native Americans and be the beginning of the end for them in the Northwest Territory. Speaking of the Northwest Territory, the British for a while support the Native Americans, but after Jay's Treaty, the British no longer help them, and that's the end for the Native Americans. 1792, General Wayne is put in charge, and he starts having his way with the Native Americans in the Northwest Territory and start driving them out and killing them. So it's kind of the end of Native American success in Ohio, points in the Ohio Valley. Native Americans were badly defeated in the Battle of Fallen Timbers. They were forced to sign the Treaty of Greenville, which gave the U.S. all the Indian lands in the Northwest Territory some agreement. Which basically said, we're taking your land, you have to leave. So that's kind of usually how it went with the and there you can see the Greenville Fort there. And there's the Battle of Fallen Timbers, fierce fighting back and forth between the natives and the American army, but in the end the Native Americans would lose pretty badly and be forced to sign the treaty that gives up all their Whiskey Rebellion. New tax put on whiskey. What's called a sin tax. It said whiskey is bad for you. We need to make money. Let's tax it. So a sin tax. You probably hear about that in the future. Taxes on cigarettes, alcohol. It's called sin taxes. That's all fine and dandy because you're taxing something that's pretty much bad for people. But what about the farmers who are growing the corn to make the whiskey? It's killing their business. And it's causing all kinds of problems. It's making them not be able to pay their bills. And they're angry about the tax because no one's buying whiskey anymore because it's too expensive because of the tax. And so they go on all-out rebellion in Pennsylvania. And again, they're testing the new government. And Washington's not going to stand for it. He sends the army and puts an end to the rebellion very quickly. So the importance of the Whiskey Rebellion is that although America stands for freedom, there are limits to what you can do. You have to live peacefully, and we weren't going to tolerate rebellions and things like that. So Washington made a good decision there to really stand up strongly to that, prevent chaos. And there's a picture of that. He marched the army right up there, and the farmers pretty much gave up without much of a Washington retired in 1796. He was kind of old, kind of tired. He wasn't really overjoyed to be president in the beginning. He wanted to, after the long Revolutionary War, he just wanted to retire to Mount Vernon, his farm, and relax. And so he only serves, really one term. But that was really a good thing for our country because at this point, George Washington is the face of the country. He's the number one celebrity in the country. The country could have become all about him. He could have been president and made himself king forever if he wanted to. But by retiring, he says, no, America is about the ideas and the freedom and the liberty and all the things in the Declaration of Independence. And that was a great signal to send to the people and a great step for our country. And so John Adams is going to be the second president. There's John Adams. And we have a heated election in 1796, the first really highly contested election. We had the first political parties, the Federalist Party, which is headed by Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton's not going to run for president, but he supports John Adams, the vice president, and they want a strong central government. They want power in the government. They want a powerful country. Jefferson comes back to run for the new party called the Democratic Republicans. They want a small, simple government. They want limited government power and lots of freedom for the people. In the end, Adams defeats Jefferson, and Adams will become the second president. There's also a divide here between the parties. Mainly Southerners support Jefferson, agricultural Southerners. In the northern areas, New York and Boston, they support Hamilton. So again, that divide between North and South, urban and rural, starts from the beginning, and it's going to keep building and building, along with the issue of slavery, all the way up to the Civil War. XYZ Affair. Adams wants to make peace with France, so he sends people over there called diplomats or foreign negotiators to Paris, and the stuck-up French demand a $250,000 bribe just to talk. And when they brought the news back, people were outraged. They could not believe that the French were so arrogant that we had to pay $250,000 just to talk to them. And the people were so mad that they were demanding that we go to war to teach the French a lesson. That's probably a silly reason to go to war. And Adams realized that, and he kind of just downplayed it and pushed it away. 1798, this is a bad thing for our country. Alien and Sedition Acts were put into place. Basically saying you cannot speak out against the government. You can't publish things that are against the government. And this is really a bad deal. We're all about freedom in America, and that's, the basic freedom and right you have to criticize the government is one of the most important things in America. And to think that Congress and the president would pass something like this is almost criminal to me to think about now. Luckily, people fought against it. The Kentucky and Virginia resolutions fought against it at the state levels. They said that the Alien Sedition Acts are unconstitutional. They don't follow the Constitution, and that the federal government cannot interfere with state law, basically saying that in Kentucky and in Virginia, the Alien Sedition Acts will not be followed. So at least some people had the courage to stand up against them, but this is, something that not good for our country, and it won't last very long, thankfully, if we continue to fight for our own freedom within our own government. So that kind of summarizes the whole time period. Washington was a great leader. We had the great minds of Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson fighting for control and vision of what the country should be. We stand up to our other foreign countries, make some good treaties, and we're on shaky grounds, but we're starting to get our feet together and get it steady as a country here. So that's a summary of Chapter 7, and I hope it was helpful. Thank you.